Your Honor, my husband is a parasite. He has contributed nothing to this marriage, nothing to my success, nothing to this household. Funded entirely by me. He sat at that kitchen table for 9 years pretending to work. I want my life back, Your Honor. All of it.
I built everything while he sat at home, pretending to be some kind of financial genius. The courtroom murmured. Then Victoria looked directly at me and smiled. You're just a freeloader, Ethan. A grown man who spent years living off a woman who actually had ambition. Someone in the gallery laughed. I didn't. I simply sat there and let her finish destroying the man she thought she knew. Because Victoria had made one enormous mistake. She thought I was poor. She thought I needed her money. She thought the house, the cars, the investments, even the life she bragged about building, belonged to her. She had no idea how badly she had miscalculated. Her lawyer suddenly stood. Your Honor, before the court accepts that characterization, there's something Mrs. Grant needs to understand. Victoria turned toward him. What are you talking about? He placed a black folder on the judge's desk. Then he opened it. My client's financial records have been independently verified. He looked directly at Victoria. Ethan Cole is not a financial dependent. He paused. He is the controlling beneficiary of a private trust, currently valued at approximately $7.4 billion. The courtroom died. No whispers, no laughter, nothing. Victoria's face changed. That's impossible. Her lawyer turned another page. No, Mrs. Grant, he looked at the judge. What's impossible is what she has claimed in this courtroom. Victoria stared at me. For the first time in years, she wasn't looking at me like I was beneath her. She was looking at me like she was seeing a stranger. But the $7.4 billion wasn't the real shock. I had kept that fortune hidden for years because I wanted to know who loved Ethan and who only respected his money. Then the lawyer placed one final document on the table. And Your Honor, we have one more issue. Victoria slowly turned toward him. The lawyer looked at her. This document concerns the money Mrs. Grant claims she built herself. Her face went pale, because the next revelation wouldn't expose my fortune. It would expose hers. And once the judge saw what was inside that folder, the woman who had just called me a parasite would realize she had spent years humiliating the very man who had secretly kept her entire empire alive. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I want to take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the marriage, but further than that. Back to the decision that made everything else possible and impossible at the same time. The decision that put me in that courtroom chair, in a quiet dark suit, while the woman I had loved for 9 years called me nothing in front of strangers who believed her. My father's name was Raymond Cole. He built Cole Meridian Holdings from a single commercial property in Birmingham, Alabama, a 3-story office building he had purchased with borrowed money and renovated himself over 14 months with 2 employees and a belief that people underestimate focused patience. He scaled it methodically, carefully, without announcing himself, into a diversified private holding company spanning commercial real estate, infrastructure, logistics, and financial services. By the time I was 22, the company had already crossed what most people would consider a number that changes everything. By the time I inherited controlling interest at 31, when my father died from a heart attack on a Tuesday morning in October, the trust valuation was approaching $4 billion. It has grown considerably since. What my father taught me in the years before he died was not the mechanics of wealth. He had advisors for that. What he taught me was what money does to the people around a man who has it. He described it once at the kitchen table, the way he described most things, without drama, with the specific precision of someone who has observed something long enough to understand it completely. He said, money is a filter, Ethan. Once people know you have it, you can never be sure what they actually see when they look at you. You lose the ability to know. I watched that happen to him. I watched relationships that had existed for decades reconfigure themselves the moment the wrong person found out what Cole Meridian was actually worth. I watched the quality of the room he entered change the instant people understood the number attached to his name. By the time he died, he had spent the last several years of his life unable to trust the warmth he received because he could no longer determine what was generating it. I decided at 31, the week after his funeral, standing in the Birmingham house where I had grown up, that I was not going to live that way. I restructured Cole Meridian under the Cole Family Trust, removed my name from every public document, placed operational governance in the hands of a board led by my attorney and lifelong advisor Denise Chambers, a woman with the kind of professional precision that made silence feel like its own form of confidence. Then I moved to Atlanta, leased a modest apartment, and built a life in which the trust existed and I did not, publicly. I took consulting work under my own name, small engagement, real work, enough to answer the question of what I did without inviting further inquiry. I was not performing poverty. I was protecting something I had watched my father lose and never recover. The ability to know, with genuine certainty, who in front of him was real. I met Victoria at a business development conference in Atlanta 7 years ago. She was presenting a panel on scaling advisory firms in emerging markets, and she was extraordinary at it. Not in the way of someone who has rehearsed their authority, but in the way of someone who has built it from the actual experience of doing difficult things and surviving the difficulty. She was sharp and specific, and she had the particular quality of intelligence that does not need to fill every silence with sound. I found that immediately compelling. We ended up speaking for 40 minutes in the hotel lobby after her session ended, and somewhere in the third conversation, I understood that Victoria Grant was the kind of person I had been careful about for years. The kind who made ordinary caution feel like it was costing you something. I did not tell her about the trust on our first date, or our third, or our 30th. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. What I was actually doing was something I only understood much later, which was testing whether the right moment would ever need to arrive, whether she would keep choosing me before she had any financial reason to. For 2 years she did, and by the time we married, I had convinced myself that the test had been passed, that I understood what I was looking at. I was right about Victoria's intelligence. I was wrong about what success would do to her when it arrived fast, and without the friction that usually teaches people the difference between confidence and contempt. In the early years, I helped the way a partner helps when they can see something the other person cannot quite see from where they are standing. Victoria's company, Grant Strategic Advisors, was growing, and she was navigating expansion decisions that carried risks her team was not identifying clearly. I read contracts she left on the kitchen table and mentioned once over dinner that the liability clause in Section 7 of the Hartfield Agreement would expose her company if the project delivery timeline slipped past 90 days. She had her lawyers look at it the next morning. The clause was amended. She did not tell anyone how it came to her attention. I did not ask her to. When her company was evaluating a significant capital raise, and the terms being offered by the lead investor contained a convertible note structure that would have diluted her equity by 40% within 3 years. Under standard market conditions, I sketched out the math on the back of a grocery list and left it on her desk. She went back to the table and negotiated fundamentally different terms. The deal closed better than it would have otherwise. Her team congratulated her on her instincts. I cooked dinner and let the subject go. I am not telling you this to establish that I was owed something. I am telling you this because it matters to understand what Victoria was actually building and who she was building it with, even when she could not see that clearly herself. The problem, the one I failed to anticipate clearly enough, was what happened when her success grew large enough that the people around her began to reshape how she understood her own story. Her circle changed. The friends and advisors who had been present during the early difficult years were gradually replaced by people who had arrived after the results were already visible. These new people had the specific quality of those who attached themselves to success they did not witness being built. They had no memory of Victoria before the revenue. They had no reference point for who she had been before the recognition. And into that vacuum they inserted a narrative that was flattering to her and convenient for them, which was that she had done it entirely alone, that her instincts were entirely her own, and that the quiet man in her house, who had no visible corporate affiliation and no social profile to speak of, was a weight she had been generous enough to carry. Marcus Ellison arrived 2 years before the divorce papers. He came as an investment advisor recommended by a board member Victoria had added the previous year, and from the first meeting I watched him the way my father had taught me to watch certain people, not for what they said, but for the gap between what they said and what they were arranging while they were saying it. Marcus was polished and attentive, and he told Victoria things she wanted to hear in the specific sequence that made them feel like revelations she was arriving at herself. Within 4 months, he had moved from external advisor to her company's strategic investment partner. Within 8 months, he was controlling the direction of 3 of her largest accounts. I told Victoria twice that something in the capital movement through those accounts did not track correctly with the stated investment thesis. She told me I was reaching. She said the word gently the first time, and with an edge the second time, that I recognized as the beginning of something I had been watching approach for longer than I wanted to acknowledge. The edge said that she had stopped finding my observations useful and had started finding them inconvenient. She had a room full of credentialed advisors, she said. She did not need me to read the margins of documents she brought home for other reasons. The conversation ended before it finished. I did not bring it up again. I started building a separate file. The divorce papers arrived on a Wednesday morning while I was on a call with Denise. I saw the envelope on the kitchen table when I came downstairs. Courier delivered. My name printed in the clean typeface of a law firm I recognized as one of the most aggressive family law practices in Atlanta. Victoria had been in the office since 7. She had not left a note. I sat at that table for a long time after the call with Denise ended. Not because I was surprised. I had been watching the marriage contract for 2 years in the same way I watch any agreement that is approaching a critical clause, with the specific attention of someone who knows what the language looks like when a party has already decided to exit and is managing the timing. What I had not fully processed until I was sitting there with the papers in front of me was what it would cost to let this proceed the way Victoria clearly intended it to proceed. Her filing was aggressive, in a way that told me she had been working with her legal team for considerably longer than a few weeks. It accused me of financial dependency, of concealing my actual professional activities, and of failing to contribute meaningfully to the marital household. It requested primary ownership of the property on Greystone Avenue, which she listed as having been purchased with her income. It requested the full contents of the joint investment accounts, control of several equity positions, and a formal financial declaration requiring me to disclose all assets. The Greystone Avenue property had been purchased by the Cole Family Trust 18 months before Victoria and I met. Her name had never appeared on the title. Her money had never funded it. Either she genuinely did not know that, or she was betting I could not prove it. Both possibilities told me something that I sat with for a long time before I called Denise back. Denise had been my attorney for 11 years. She had the quality of a person who processes information faster than she allows her expression to confirm, which meant that when she was quiet on a call, it was never because she had run out of things to say. I told her what was in the filing. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "They are going to go public with the dependent narrative before the deposition. They want the social pressure to set the frame before the legal record can be established. How long until the first hearing?" 6 weeks, I said. "We have time." "Denise," I said, "I want to do this correctly. I want them to build their entire case first. Let them put every piece of the argument into the record before we respond to any of it." She understood what I was asking and why. There is a particular kind of answer that only becomes complete when the question has been allowed to fully develop. If I released the trust documentation immediately, the case would collapse in 48 hours, but the question of what Victoria had actually believed about me and why would never have a full answer. I needed to hear her say it in her own words, in a room where the words would be recorded. I needed to know, with the specific certainty that only public record provides, what she had actually decided I was. The coverage started before the first mediation session. A business publication with considerable readership ran a feature profile on Victoria that spent 3 paragraphs describing the challenges of building a company while navigating a marriage in which the financial weight was not shared equally. The piece did not name me directly, but the description was specific enough to be unmistakable. Sources close to Grant Strategic Advisors said the firm's founder had quietly supported a spouse whose professional ambitions had never materialized in ways that contributed to the household. I read it at the kitchen table in the house that the Cole Family Trust had owned since before Victoria and I met, and I poured another cup of coffee and said nothing to anyone. 2 more pieces followed in the next week, each progressively more detailed, each borrowing language from the previous one in the way that coordinated press campaigns tend to build on their own foundation. I understood the strategy. They were constructing a public version of me that would make the courtroom version feel like confirmation rather than allegation. What they had not accounted for was that I had spent 12 years building a private financial architecture specifically designed to be immune to exactly this kind of pressure. I could wait. The mediation failed in the way Denise had anticipated it would, which was that Victoria's lead attorney arrived with a prepared summary of her position and no real interest in anything I might offer in response. He described the marriage as a financial arrangement in which one party had carried an unproductive dependent and was now seeking appropriate relief. He used the phrase appropriate relief 3 times. Victoria sat across the table in the gray blazer she wore when she wanted to project authority and looked at me the way you look at a problem whose solution you have already delegated. I placed an envelope on the table midway through the session. Inside was a summary of the Greystone property title history. 1 page, clean, factual. I asked her to read it before the proceeding went further. She picked up the envelope, looked at it, and passed it unopened to her attorney. He set it on his side of the table and continued speaking. I left the mediation understanding something I had been avoiding understanding for several months, which was that Victoria was not simply mistaken about who I was. She had made a decision about who I was and had constructed an explanation around the decision. Evidence that contradicted the explanation was not being evaluated. It was being discarded before it could be read. That is a different problem from a misunderstanding, and it required a different response. What I had been building in parallel while the press coverage accumulated and the mediation failed was a complete forensic reconstruction of Marcus Ellison's activities inside Victoria's company. Denise had retained a financial forensics team 6 weeks after the divorce papers arrived, not because I needed it for the trust documentation, which was clean and complete, but because what I had seen in those capital movement records over the preceding 18 months had not resolved into anything innocent the more closely I examined it. The forensic team found what I had suspected, and something considerably worse than what I had suspected. Marcus had been moving funds from 3 of Victoria's largest managed accounts through a network of intermediary entities, siphoning percentages small enough to survive a surface audit, but substantial enough across the volume of transactions to total, over 22 months, just over $43 million. He had done it with the specific technical sophistication of someone who understood exactly where the monitoring systems had gaps. And he had positioned Victoria's own signature on several of the authorization documents that established the transfer framework, meaning that when the operation eventually came apart, she would be the one holding the paperwork. He had not told her what she was signing. He had described the documents as administrative infrastructure for the new investment vehicles. She had signed them because she trusted him and because he was fluent in the language of legitimacy. Denise submitted a sealed referral to the Financial Crimes Unit the week before the trial. I did not tell Victoria. I had tried twice to tell her something was wrong with Marcus, and she had not listened. The third time was going to happen in a room where the record would be permanent. The courtroom on the morning of the trial had the specific quality of a room that has been arranged by one side to tell a story. Victoria's team had ensured a strong gallery presence. Journalists occupied the back rows. The energy was the energy of a verdict that has already been composed and is waiting for the proceeding to provide the formality. Victoria wore a dark structured blazer and arrived with 3 attorneys and the composed certainty of someone who has been told by everyone around her that the outcome is settled. Marcus Ellison sat 3 rows from the back. I noticed him when I came in. He noticed me noticing him and held my gaze for exactly 1 second before looking away. Denise sat on my left. The black briefcase was on the floor between us. I had not slept well, and I was not pretending otherwise. What I was certain. There is a specific quality of stillness that comes when a decision has been fully made, and the moment for it has finally arrived. I had that stillness in my body the way I had had it once before, standing in the Birmingham house the week after my father died, understanding with complete clarity what I was going to do with what he had left me. Victoria's attorney opened with his prepared narrative. He used the word dependent 4 times in the first 3 minutes. He described my years of living, as he characterized it, on the income of a driven and accomplished woman who had asked for nothing in return except a partnership she never received. He built toward his conclusion with the confidence of a man whose evidence, he believed, was clean. Then Victoria took the stand. She was composed and deliberate, and she described our marriage in the specific language of patience exhausted. A woman who had given everything. A man who had taken it. She called me a freeloader, with the casual precision of someone using a word they have used privately many times, and are simply now saying out loud, in a room where it will be recorded. Someone in the gallery expressed agreement. Denise's hand rested flat and still on the table beside me. She did not look at me. She did not need to. The moment we had been building toward for 11 weeks was now precisely 60 seconds away. Denise stood and approached the stand without rushing. She set a single sheet of paper on the railing. "Mrs. Grant, you testified that you purchased the Greystone Avenue property using your personal income. Is that accurate?" Victoria met her eyes. "It is." Denise handed the document to the court clerk, who provided copies to the judge and opposing counsel. "What you have in front of you is the original title record for the Greystone Avenue property. The purchase date is 14 years ago, 3 years before you and Mr. Cole were married. The registered owner is the Cole Family Trust, a private trust established in my client's name 12 years before your marriage." She paused in the specific way that allows information to fully occupy a room. "Your name has never appeared on this deed, Mrs. Grant. Your income has never funded this property." Opposing counsel was on his feet. The judge held up one hand. He sat back down. Victoria was looking at the document in the way she had looked at the envelope I placed on the mediation table. But this time the document was already in the judge's hands, and it was already in the record, and there was no one left to hand it to without reading it. Denise returned to our table and lifted the briefcase onto the surface. She opened it and removed a second folder, thicker than the first, and placed it before the judge with copies distributed to the clerk and opposing counsel. "What you are reviewing now," she said, "is the ownership record of Cole Meridian Holdings, a private investment group operating through the Cole Family Trust. Articles of incorporation, shareholder registry, beneficial ownership certification, verified by a federal auditor, signed by 3 independent board members." She turned briefly toward the gallery. "As of the most recent independent audit, the trust's verified asset value is $7.4 billion. My client, Ethan James Cole, is its sole controlling beneficiary." The courtroom did not murmur. It simply stopped. The specific quality of silence that arrives when a room's entire understanding of a situation has been revised simultaneously, and the revision is too large to immediately produce sound. I watched Victoria's face. She was not performing anymore. There was nothing left to perform with. The expression she had was the expression of someone standing in a room they thought they recognized and discovering that every door opens onto something they did not know was there. "That's impossible," she said. The words came out quietly, not as a legal argument, as an honest response to disorientation. Denise answered her without raising her voice. "What's impossible, Mrs. Grant, is the characterization you have offered this court of your husband's financial standing and his contribution to this marriage." She opened the third folder. Over the last 6 years, Cole Meridian Holdings has made investments in 9 separate companies. One of those companies is Grant Strategic Advisors. She placed the investment records on the judge's desk. "Across 4 transactions, the total capital directed into your firm from my client's holdings amounts to $230 million. In 3 specific instances, she named the dates precisely. That capital was the only mechanism preventing your company from defaulting on its credit obligations." Victoria stared at the documents. The color in her face had shifted in the way that faces shift when the ground underneath a person has changed entirely, and the person's body has registered it before the mind has caught up. "For 6 years, Denise said, while you publicly described Ethan Cole as a man who contributed nothing, his investment group was the reason your company existed to be described." Opposing counsel said something to Victoria quietly. She did not respond to him. She was looking at me, not with the contempt she had brought into this room, with the specific expression of a person dismantling 9 years of understanding in real time and finding that the architecture underneath it was not what they had been told it was. "You knew," she said. "It wasn't directed at the court. You knew the entire time." "I told you twice that something was wrong with Marcus," I said. "You told me I was reaching." She opened her mouth. Something closed it again. Denise was not finished. She called Marcus Ellison as a witness. He had not expected to be called. The 2 federal financial investigators who had been seated near the gallery entrance were already positioned when his name was read into the record. Denise had submitted the forensics report to the court under seal the previous morning, coordinated with the financial crimes referral that had been moving through the system for 6 weeks. She walked Marcus through the capital movement records with the unhurried clarity of someone reading a document they have read many times and know by exact chapter. She identified each intermediary entity. She identified each transfer. She identified the authorization documents that bore Victoria's signature and established on the record that Victoria had been given false descriptions of what she was signing, which the forensic team had reconstructed from Marcus's internal communications with the network of intermediary operators he had used. $43 million, Denise said, moved across 22 months through a structure designed to survive a standard audit and to leave the trail of authorization pointing at a company founder who did not understand what she had authorized. Marcus looked at the table. He had stopped answering questions in complete sentences 4 questions earlier. The investigators moved toward him before Denise had finished her final question. He was arrested in the courtroom. The charges were read in a flat procedural voice. Financial fraud, evidence tampering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate theft. They walked him out, and the room watched in a silence that had a different quality from the silence that had followed the trust disclosure. This silence had the quality of something that had been suspected, and was now confirmed, and was now over. Victoria sat very still for a long time after the session concluded, and the gallery had cleared, and the journalists had moved toward the exits, with the specific energy of people who understand that the story they arrived to cover has been replaced by a considerably larger one. Her attorneys were beside her, but she was not speaking to them. I passed her table on the way to the corridor and she looked up. She did not say anything immediately. I stopped. I did not have a prepared speech. I had spent 11 weeks understanding what I needed to say in this moment, and in the end, it was simpler than anything I had scripted. I told her that I had never hidden the trust to control her or deceive her in any way that was designed to disadvantage her. I had hidden it because I had watched what my father lost when the wrong people understood what he was worth. And I had needed to know with certainty that the person I was choosing to spend my life with was choosing me before she had any financial reason to. I told her I had believed for a long time that she had passed that test, that the woman I had watched build something real from genuine effort and genuine intelligence was choosing Ethan Cole, not what was behind the name. And I told her that when she stopped asking what I thought, when she began measuring me against men whose worth she could calculate from their public profiles, when she signed a sworn declaration that she knew contained information she had not verified because it served a story she had decided was already finished, she answered the question I had been holding for years. She answered it in the most public way available. Victoria looked at the table. She said that she had been wrong. She said it in the specific way of someone who has been wrong about something foundational and is only now beginning to understand the full shape of what the wrongness cost. I told her I believed that. I also told her that being wrong and understanding you were wrong are 2 different things, and that only one of them was an apology. I walked out into the corridor and found Denise beside the elevator, and we rode down in the specific, comfortable silence of 2 people who have been through something together and do not need to describe it to each other. Judge Moreland's rulings came before the session officially closed. The Greystone Avenue property was confirmed as premarital separate property of the Cole Family Trust. Victoria had no legal claim. The joint investment accounts were reviewed against the documented evidence of their origin and substantially reclassified in my favor. The account freeze was lifted before the end of business. The alimony request was denied. The false sworn declaration was referred to the district attorney's office. Victoria's cooperation with the Marcus investigation, which she provided fully once the scope of what he had done became clear, ultimately protected her from criminal conviction. She accepted a financial penalty and a period of supervised compliance. She did not go to prison. I had not wanted that. I also instructed Denise to ensure that Victoria retained her full share of what had been legitimately generated during the marriage, the savings and equity that were genuinely hers. I was not drawing a line around everything. I was drawing a line around the truth. Her company's board removed her 2 months after the trial. The combination of the false declarations and the internal decisions that came under scrutiny once the forensic investigation extended into Grant Strategic Advisors made her position impossible to defend. She cleared her office on a Monday and left without a public statement. I did not intervene. I did not accelerate anything. I did not cushion anything. She had made her choices over a period of years, each one following from the one before it. Each one building the architecture that eventually stood against her in a courtroom she had arranged expecting a different outcome. The consequences were their own. 6 months later, I stood in a conference room at Cole Meridian's Atlanta office during our annual foundation review. The Cole Foundation had been operating quietly for 3 years. 2 primary programs: business education grants for first-generation entrepreneurs in underserved communities, and legal aid funding for individuals who had lost assets through financial fraud in domestic disputes. I had not spoken publicly about the foundation until the trial made the name public. After the coverage, the grant applications had increased by a factor of 6 in the first month alone. My mother, Evelyn Cole, who had been my father's partner for 38 years and who had watched me build walls around the trust, with the specific patience of a woman who understood exactly why her son was doing it and never once suggested he should do it differently, attended the review. She sat at the end of the conference table and listened to the program updates with the focused attention she had brought to everything for as long as I had known her, and at the end, she said that she thought Raymond would have been satisfied. I told her I thought so too. A reporter had caught me on the courthouse steps the afternoon of the verdict. She was young, holding a recorder at an angle that suggested she had been doing this for less than a year, and she asked the question directly. "Mr. Cole, you could have disclosed your identity the moment your wife called you a freeloader in open court. You had everything you needed to end the case in that moment. Why didn't you?" I thought about the real answer, about the specific weight of the question my father had posed at a kitchen table in Birmingham 30 years ago, when I was still young enough to think the problem he was describing could be solved by simply not acquiring the thing that caused it. About the 11 weeks of watching Victoria build a public case on a version of me that she had decided was complete and did not require verification. About the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being known incorrectly by someone you have chosen to be known by. Some people, I said, will only respect you once they know what you are worth. But when it works that way, what they are respecting is not you. It is the number, and I needed to know which one I was dealing with. I looked back at the courthouse doors. "Now I know," I said, "and I can live with that." I walked down the steps into a morning in Atlanta that was exactly as ordinary as every other morning I had chosen to live inside for 12 years. The walls were down. The question had its answer. The man who stood on those steps had nothing left to hide, and found, as he had suspected he would find from the very beginning, that the absence of concealment felt less like vulnerability and more like something he had not had in a very long time, which was simply himself, standing in plain daylight, with nothing between him and whatever came next. The truth about money is not that it makes you powerful, it is that it changes what other people are willing to show you about themselves. The real question, the one my father spent the last years of his life unable to answer because the experiment had already run past the point of recovery, is whether the people closest to you would choose you before the number made the choice obvious. Victoria had 9 years to answer that question. She had answered it on a Wednesday morning with a courier envelope, and on a Thursday with a press release, and in a courtroom with a word she delivered like a verdict. I am not telling you this story as a story about winning. I am telling you this as a story about what it costs to find out the truth about the people you love and what it means to find it in a way that cannot be taken back or reinterpreted. The answer I received was painful. It was also, finally, the kind of answer you can build something honest on. And that, after everything, turned out to be worth considerably more than $7.4 billion. If this story stayed with you, drop your location in the comments and tell us what moment hit you hardest. Subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications, because next week we are telling you the story of a woman who walked away from everything she owned to protect one person who deserved it, and what she discovered about herself on the other side of that decision. That story is coming next week. Do not miss it.